Welcome to our second MOC Talk. We're honored to present a conversation with Professor Sally Maitlis, a professor of organizational behavior and leadership at Saïd Business School, University of Oxford. She brings a unique perspective to organizational scholarship, shaped not only by decades of academic experience in sense-making, trauma and adversity at work, and the process of personal growth, but also by her practical experience in consulting psychology. Whether you are a student, scholar, or practitioner, Professor Maylis' wisdom offers guidance on embracing multidimensional identities, finding and sustaining meaning and passion, and making space for light. We hope this mock talk offers both insight and encouragement. Thank you, Professor Maylis, for joining our interview today. So my first question for you will be kind of related to your research stream. I was wondering, what have you learned through your research on meaningful work and sense making about how people find and create meaning in their work? And especially, what does meaning in an academic career look like to you? And how has your perspective on it evolved over time?
Okay, interesting questions. And yeah, I feel I've learned a lot, yeah, through my research and through my own life, of course, about meaningful work and sense making, creating meaning. And I would say, just talking very broadly, I mean, I've learned that people can find meaning in places and in forms that they did not expect to. And also that we are incredibly agentic at creating meaning in very challenging circumstances. And so I'm thinking of, a study that I did with a whole set of wonderful colleagues about rag pickers in India. And, we think of that kind of work as being, extreme dirty work. And it's easy to assume that that work can only be functional. I mean, it can just help these people stay alive, but how could it be meaningful? And yet, what we found was that these individuals and many other people doing what appears to be very difficult or very mundane work, craft that work and make meanings that are very powerful and allow them to do much more than just live. Um, I mean, the other thing is I've spent a lot of time looking at individuals whose understanding of their work and their understandings of themselves has been disrupted by events they didn't expect to happen. And I've seen how amazingly resourceful people are in creating new meanings for themselves when that happens, or even reconnecting to old meanings, which they originally, they felt they'd completely lost. And I've seen that in different contexts. So studying musicians and dancers who had injuries that prevented them from continuing to do what they felt was their life's work. And these people moved from being deeply, deeply distressed and despairing to make sense of what had happened and make sense of who they were and who they could become in ways that not only created meaning to move forward, but also created a post-traumatic growth for many of them. So that's a sort of one context, but in a totally different context, I've seen this kind of process in senior leaders who struggle in secret with debilitating mental health issues. And again, in a very different way, work with Kira Shabram in our study of animal shelter workers who burned out by following what they felt was their most meaningful work. But they found new ways to make the contributions they wanted to make, and to be the people that they were aspiring to be. So those are some thoughts on my sort of academic scholarship. But I mean, just thinking about, as you asked, meaning in an academic career. And I think there are loads of sources of meaning in an academic career, but we talk about some more than others, and we valorize some more than others. And there are activities that can feel meaningful, initially, but then can become less meaningful over time or less meaningful because of particular things that happen. And I think often when people talk about academic jobs, they break them down into like the three buckets of sort of research, teaching, and service. And there's no question that it's possible to find meaning in each of those buckets, but whether you do depends on a whole set of different things. And some of those things are to do with you, what is meaningful to you, but others are to do with where you are, in terms of your school, where you are in your life, what else is going on in your life. And a lot is to do with also what other people around you, are sort of telling you you should be finding meaning in. So I think that when you start out as a junior academic, most junior academics are not encouraged to find meaning in their school or university service. And they might be asked to do a fair bit of this, but don't be thinking this is what the job is about. But I remember knowing junior scholars who actually ended up finding certain kinds of committee work they did and some particular service activities more meaningful than the other parts of their work, or at least they found them easier to feel they were making a real contribution with, and certainly being appreciated for that. But they kind of felt guilty because they weren't really supposed to be enjoying it, and certainly wouldn't get tenure because they were doing that. So I think that's sort of one complicating factor. And also, depending on your school, you may even feel guilty if you find the most meaning in your teaching. Often schools that identify as research intensive,
That's it. Yeah.
they don't want you to get too involved in your teaching. They still want you to do it well, but they don't want it to be too central to your identity. And that can be very hard if you're finding the research and publication process kind of slow or discouraging, but then you go into class and you feel alive and you feel valued and the students like you. And so it's sort of very easy to be pulled in different directions, for these reasons. And even within something like research, which is often where people say, well, this is what's sort of meaningful for me. Um, I mean, there are different parts to research. So for me, the data collection is usually incredibly enjoyable, very moving, very meaningful part of the research. But it can be very easy to lose a sense of meaning in the sort of endless task of writing and rewriting a paper for publication. And so when it comes to just my own experience, I think academic papers are, obviously important as a way of developing our thinking, but also sort of creating a record of what we've done. But some of the most meaningful experiences I've had with research is when I share stuff I've learned with people to whom the work really speaks personally. So when I talk about senior leaders' mental health struggles with senior leaders that I'm teaching and just watch their eyes open and watch them feel, somebody's telling their story and has studied it. Or similarly, when I talk about the identity challenges of losing meaningful work with people who recognize the experience I'm describing from their own lives and their own losses. So this is when research, really comes alive and most meaningful for me.
Yeah, speaking of the data collections, especially you have done a lot of qualitative work and interviewed a lot of people in different industries and professions. So I have a related question, which is,
Mm.
alongside your work as an OB scholar, you have also dedicated yourself to the theory and practice of counseling psychology. And your journey into counseling psychology, as I known before that it began with an evening class in a dynamic theory during graduate school. So I was very curious what sparked your interest and what was the moment or experience that drew you in this field.
Um, well, I don't know if there was exactly a moment. I've had a long interest in understanding people. Like since I was a teenager, this is what I would sort of like to sit around and think about. And so I did psych as an undergraduate degree. And actually, I thought I was a bit disappointed because I thought we were all going to be sitting around discussing Freud, and we never did that, or we only did it to kind of debunk him and say, well, we shouldn't listen to Freud anymore. But I sort of felt for a long time that I should know more about psychodynamic theory. When you tell people you do psychology, they all think, don't psychoanalyze me. And so I just sort of felt I can't because I don't understand the theory because I never learned about it. And so I had worked in consulting. I'd been back, I came back into this academic environment, and there was this evening class, and I thought, well, let me go and check it out. And what I hadn't expected was that the tutor would use psychodynamic ideas to get us to look at our own experiences and histories. And so the evening class was this amazing blend of sort of psychodynamic theory, but also applying it to our own lives, and really got me thinking about things just in a very different way. And it was also very connective because you were sitting having these rather personal conversations with people you didn't know at the beginning of the term. So I think that was the sort of, I don't know if that was the pull, that was kind of the return. I feel like I've spent my life returning to psychology and to people's struggles. And sort of this was probably one of the beginnings of that return.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And since so actually this is all about like passion and like completely interest driven a journey, right? Since you have
Mm,
this interest in your like teenager years, and then you were thinking about like, okay, I need more like theory to guide this interest, and this kind of journey started since then.
mhm, exactly.
Yeah. And so since this is a kind of different identity or different series of like um activities that also require a lot of like effort or time. So I was also wondering in the earlier stage of your career when your academic life and consulting psychology world because are quite different and they were more maybe separate and private. And you also talk about like your other identity kind of offered a refugee on your doctors in the academic life. And this
Mm.
kind of gave you the space to explore different ways of being and thinking. And later on, the crossing and integration of these two different words also nourished both you and your research. And here I do see a very beautiful sense of balance in how you've brought them together. So many of us, especially as early career scholars, frequently feel that we are caught in the pressure of the job market clock and tenure clock, and the expectation to wait until later for our life beyond our academic work. So I think I also have this question about how have you learned to balance these different identities and what advice might you give to those who are still navigating these pressures?
Well, I mean, I don't want to idealize my life, especially the early pre-tenure years, um, because I pursued the study of counseling psychology because I found it life-giving during a period I found pretty tough.
Yeah.
And yeah, as you said, I sort of kept it secret because I thought it could jeopardize my tenure and career if people knew about it. So I wasn't this kind of super liberated person who said, I'm going to do what the hell I like and, sort of never mind the consequences. That wasn't how I felt at all. Um, and in the piece I wrote in the Journal of Management Inquiry, I sort of talked about this real fear I had that I wouldn't be taken seriously. I wouldn't be seen as committed to my academic career if people knew that I was also engaged in something that, from the outside, appeared, irrelevant or even at odds with my work as an OB professor. But the reason I did that learning was because, although it took, time and attention, it really fed me. And I loved the classes. I felt that the evening I spent, once a week learning about clinical theory and practice was my treat. I used to say it's my treat this evening, in a time when a lot of my life seemed to have demands that felt, heavy and draining. So that was my story. And with advice, giving advice to other people. In fact, when I was writing that piece for JMI, one of the reviewers and the editor kept sort of saying, "Well, what advice do you have? Give advice, give advice to young scholars with this." And I was very resistant, and that's partly because I think in general we should give a bit less advice and we should do a bit more listening, but also because I do think what worked for me just might not suit somebody else who's a different person with different circumstances. So for me, it made sense to do that kind of serious hobby in parallel with getting tenure or trying to get tenure because it felt like it gave me much more than it took from me. So Mason, mainly it was just a few hours each week, and every time it sort of lifted me up and gave me energy. Um, but for somebody else, that could be a big distraction. Maybe it would be better for them to wait till after. But again, I do worry about always waiting for the right time to do things because
Yeah.
in my life, that time never seems to come, or when it does, it doesn't feel like the right time, that I've promised myself. So, it feels a bit dangerous to always be promising yourself something way down the line because who knows, how it will be or who you will have become by the time you get to that point. So I think it's a very difficult set of decisions. It's not a one-off decision you make, but uh, I think it's just important to keep resourcing yourself and do what you need to do that. And if for you that's kind of just getting your head down for 6 years and going for it, I mean, good on you, good luck.
Yeah.
Um, but just to say, once you've got tenure, it's not over. You'll very soon be thinking about the next thing and the next thing. It's endless. That if you
Yeah.
get into
Yeah, it's an
climbing,
endless
it's
journey.
endless, endless,
Yes.
endless. So yeah, sort of, yeah, give yourself. give yourself something as you go. And for some people, yeah, I mean, I've never met one yet, but I'm sure for some people, the process of working to get tenure is joyful, in which case, great, great, carry on.
Yeah. Yeah, indeed, there are always a lot of like things waiting for us to deal with, to handle, and we always find ourselves like kind of lost in this trade-off between waiting everything until later and living at the moment or dancing at the moment. So it's kind really difficult. And also, as you mentioned before, like in academic life, we are always kind of guilty about balancing like between work and life or balancing between research and teaching. So it's a really tough journey and it's a marathon. Indeed, I have always heard people describing academic journey like that. And
Ultra marathon.
yes, yes, not a semi or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you've also spent much of your work as a researcher trying to understand individual struggles with adversity and also as a therapist, you have helped your clients and a lot of people navigate pain and distress toward the light. And as we also discussed before, like it's one thing to find the meaning and another to sustain meaning. And finding and sustaining meaning can also be a profound challenges for scholars at all career stages. So for those feeling disillusioned or even disconnected from their academic work for whatever reasons, what practices or mindsets have you found most helpful in finding especially sustaining meaning in this long journey and tough journey? And what suggestions again might you offer them?
Mhm. So I completely agree. This can be a real challenge. I mean, for all the wonderful things about being academic, and there are many, there are also a lot of difficult aspects of it. And I think if you're feeling, as you say, disillusioned, disconnected, I would first say it's really valuable to spend a bit of time, either just on your own or with somebody else, trying to understand what exactly it is that you're feeling. So, is it disillusionment? Is it disconnection? Or are you feeling you're not any good at this? Or are you feeling other people are doing better than you? They're going faster than you. You're not as good as them. Are you feeling you're doing too much? Are you feeling you're doing too much of the wrong thing? So I think that once you can get a better grip on what exactly it is that you're feeling, it also helps you begin to figure out how you got there. And then you can ask yourself, well, so what's happened recently? Was it getting a disappointing set of teaching evaluations, or was it getting a paper rejected? Those are things which knock all of us back. Are you going in circles with a paper or project? Are you frustrated with a co-author? Do you wish you had a co-author? There's so many things. It could be more existential. So you might be sort of wondering, really, what is the point of all of this? And each of these issues invites a different set of ways forward. And probably I think it would take a whole podcast series to explore them. And that might be an interesting project. But if I can give just a few very general reflections, given that, a lot of people have a lot of different experiences for a lot of different reasons. But the first thing I would say is if you're feeling like this, first of all, you are not alone. And you're not weird and you're not bad for feeling any of these ways. Now, I felt all of them. And that's actually true of most of the people I know, or at least people I know well enough that they've shared that with me. So I'm not saying that makes it all right, but it does make it normal. And sometimes that's a helpful starting point with this. Um, I would say the first thing you can do is you can start thinking about how are you spending your time? And are there any small changes you can make sort of immediately, but also perhaps more gradually in the medium term that would give you a bit of a breather or a break from that paper, that set of students, that committee, that cohort, whatever it is? Is there something you can just put a little bit of a pause in to help you just momentarily feel a bit better? And then, check in. Are you spending enough time with people you care about and that care about you? I think it can be a very lonely profession. I think even when we collaborate, a lot of the time we're working on our own. And
Yeah.
even when we're teaching, we spend a lot of time prepping on our own and sitting, afterwards on our own. So there's so much research, about the power of human connection. And when you're feeling, rubbish about yourself and disillusioned and disconnected, you tend to not reach out to people. But I would say do that, even if you feel you don't have time, do that for 10 minutes. Have a call with somebody who you think can sort of resource you and be there with you. And then a few sort of thought experiments. So just reflect on when was the last time that you really enjoyed work? May seem a long time ago, but I'm sure there was some time. So when was it? Think about what were you doing, who were you doing it with, and what made it feel so good? And what might you do to be able to generate a bit of that again? I mean, maybe you can't go back to that project and that person and that place, but something in that, there's some quality of that. Could you recreate it just to remind yourself of what's good and what's meaningful in this work? And the other thing is what can you get rid of? And I think here it's also worth checking your assumptions. A lot of the time we sort of live under this tyranny of I must do this and I must do this today and I must do this week. But really double check, is it really true? What can you not do? What can you do less of? What can you park temporarily? And one of the experiences I have is that when things in my calendar get cancelled, I can feel incredibly joyful and excited. Sometimes it's the best thing that happened all day is something gets cancelled. And
Yeah,
for
I
me,
definitely resonate with that.
yeah, so that is for me as a sign that I'm either just doing way too much or that the thing that got cancelled, I should never have agreed to do it because like when you celebrate the thing disappearing, that's a clue. And then I try and remember that about the next time I'm asked to do either that kind of thing or another thing on top of already doing too much. So definitely getting rid of things I think can help allow some of the meaning to come back in. And then there's a kind of what could you add in, having got rid of some things, what could you add in that might help turn that disconnection to connection or disillusionment into meaningfulness? And that thing may not be, a current career priority for you. It might not be the thing you think you should be doing, but it may revitalize you in a crucial way. And that's really what I'm saying was going on for me with pursuing counseling psychology. For, when everybody would have said, no, why are you doing that? That's not the thing to do. But for me, that was a way of bringing back some life for me. But it can be within your work. So sometimes something like writing a practitioner article, giving a talk to a different kind of group can help remind you what the point of the research is, or building back in a social component that may have got lost, that you had in your work before, but it's kind of got lost. So any of these things, somebody once said to me many years ago, go towards the light. Whatever it is, just go towards the light because that's the only way forward, really. And so on darker days, I still, I remember that and think, okay, what looks light or what looks less dark, and just do some of that for a bit. And I think that could be really important. But I would just also say that if you've been feeling really low about academic life for a long time, maybe it's time to stop. Maybe it is time to pivot and to try something else. And a lot of my research is about people who, but for various reasons, had to stop doing what they were doing. And you think it's going to be the worst thing in the world, and it isn't necessarily. And often it's a potential, beginning of a whole new path and new growth. So I know quite a few people who were pretty unhappy academics and have become very happy other things. So this is not a failure. This is a major success if you take that decision.
Yeah, that's also sound like a life course to find our own meaning and the true happiness. And also whenever we are in our dark days, we either seek external help, talk to people, or we can also reflect on our like happy moments or the most happiest experience that we have. This kind of interventions are pretty important, and these are really good suggestions to really have those kind of self-compassionate perspective to
Mm,
take of
mhm.
care of ourselves is
Yeah,
pretty important.
yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and I read your recent publication in JMI which
Mhm.
you mentioned was also drawn from the speech you made at the 2023 AOM meeting on receipt of the MOC Division's Distinguished Scholar Award. So in that paper, you have suggested that other scholars might benefit from writing their own revisionist history. And I really love the piece that you wrote, and it's a really a great joy reading your own revisionist history. So what might be helpful starting points for others wanting to reflect on their own career paths?
Yeah, well, thank you for what you've said, and it was really helpful for me to write it actually, both to write the talk I did at the MOC meeting, and to write that piece because it helped me make sense of my life and my career. And so, I really do recommend it. And there are several places that you can start. So um, one is to just think about the usual kind of narrative that you've constructed about your career. So we all have these stories we tell people about why we do what we do, how we made the choices we did. But you sort of take that story and you think about how could you narrate the same choices or events differently. So obviously the basic pieces of the puzzle are the same, but how you're connecting them, can vary a lot. And we have lots of ways that we can explain ourselves, and every narrative, is fundamentally partial. It can only ever be a sort of part of the story. And so I can say I became an academic because my dad was one, which is true. Or I can say, well, I did a PhD because I wanted to immerse myself in studying something that I was really interested in, and I loved the research that I did, and so I became an academic because I wanted to do more of that. Or I can say some combination of those things, which is probably, a more inclusive narrative of my career choice. And so, you can think back about other reasons you did. You've got the sort of stock reasons you give people. Why am I doing a PhD? Why did I want to study OB? Whatever it is, you can sort of you can think back about that, and you can say, well, what are other reasons that might help explain what I did, and what are other frames to bring to the career choices I made? And so, some people sort of say, oh, I always wanted to be a professor. And you could say that, or in my experience, I could say, well, I enjoyed working consulting, but I became skeptical about what we were offering, and so I returned to school so I could ask questions rather than provide answers to clients. And that's kind of how I became an academic. And it's not, neither is truer than the other. They're both true, but it's a different angle on it. And another thing people do is they ask themselves, what would have been different if I hadn't got a tenure track job on the market, or if
Yeah.
I hadn't got tenure, or if I hadn't moved countries at that time? So basically, I would say writing a revisionist history is about playing with your narrative, potentially opening it up so you can allow more ways of understanding the past. And in doing that, you're creating more opportunities for the future. And I think that's why they're so valuable.
Yeah, these are great, practical and very feasible suggestion that we can really start to write our own revisionist history, and
Mhm.
it would definitely be a great reflection of ourselves. Yeah, and my last question would be, throughout your career, you've woven together insights from both organizational behavior and consulting psychology, and truly embedding the multidisciplinary scholarship. So MOC Division has also long been a home for bridging disciplines to better understand organizations and organizing. So looking back, how has being part of MOC shaped your thinking, collaborations, or sense of community across different disciplines?
I mean, MOC has been a fantastic home for me, uh, ever since I joined it and to now. So, I mean, in terms of intellectual focus, it's definitely the academy division that most closely fits my interests. And in terms of community, it's definitely where my people are. So my closest friends in the profession are in MOC, several collaborators in MOC, and multiple activities that have been really enjoyable to participate in. So I've been part of Cognition in the RAF, Diamonds in the RAF, MOC Connecting. I was a rep at large, but as well as those sort of formal things, I'm also a member of micro communities that I think aren't officially MOC groups, but they're filled with MOC people. So things like the May meaning meeting, positive relationships at work, micro community, and other groups like this, where the relationships, the conversations, the collaborations have definitely allowed me to develop different parts of myself and undoubtedly shaped, who I am as an academic and as a person.
That's great. Yeah, thank you again for sharing so many like helpful and insightful suggestions with us. And I personally have benefited a lot from this conversation with you, and I believe this will also benefit a lot of audience. I think in my future, whenever I have my distress or dark days, I will definitely record this conversation, and this will definitely help me navigate those challenges. And thank you so much.
Great. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.